Hey folks, well, you opened the box and you found all these pieces and you said, what the heck are we going to do with all this? Or how do we make anything out of it? Well, by the time you're done, you should end up with something that looks like this. Now, I never made this. This is the only one, and all this is the pieces that you've got in front of you all put together. But I'm going to give you some ideas on how to put it together, just based on stuff I've built before. Now, you may find that you know better ways to do it, or a better way to do it, and you can just go ahead and do that. These are just meant to be suggestions. The first thing I would suggest is to dry build it. Put it together the way it's supposed to be. Use the little guide that comes with it, and make sure that you have all the pieces put together the way it's supposed to end up. Be obsessive. Check every row, check every column, make sure that every one of these squares is where it's supposed to be exactly. Because when it's glued up, I know you know this, but I'm going to say it. When it's glued up, it's too late. If you find a mistake at that point, it's too far gone. So get it right, dry, and leave it that way. Now, what I mean by that is taking the pieces, putting them on the board the way they're supposed to be in the frame. Make sure you understand how the frame pieces go on so that you're comfortable with it, and then take it apart. Take that apart, and then take the other piece of MDF and put the beveled edge up against the finish board and just slide the pieces off. Take this, put it in here. Slide all of your squares as best you can. I don't think I have this beveled quite enough yet, but that's okay. For the sake of the instruction, this will work just fine. Slide it over till it's off the board entirely. Then take what's supposed to be the finished board, and you can see that two sides are glued on already. That gives you a good 90-degree starting point. What I would do, what I've done to just test it, is take a pencil, has an eraser on it, and just start in the corner, pull a piece out, bring it over to the finished board, and put it exactly, carefully, where it's supposed to be in the end. Now you'll notice on these pieces that there's two sides. They're not, the top and bottom of the plain pieces is not the same. You can see that the top side has got a little bit of a scorch mark on it. It may not show up in the video, but along a couple of the edges, there's almost always, you'll see a scorch. That's from the laser. On the back side, you'll see a mark, pencil mark, going up and down. That indicates the direction of the grain in the wood. It's because in maple, sometimes that's hard to see because it's such a fine grain, sort of a bland wood. So look for the pencil mark, and what you want to do, and it's not written in stone, but what you generally would want to do is have it so that the pencil mark is down and oriented this way. The same way as the letters, going up and down the board. You can turn it sideways if you like. If it seems to fit better or makes you happier, I don't know. But trust me, in general, what you would like to do is have those pencil marks all going this way on the bottom side, on the glue side. So to proceed, take a few more of these squares out of here. And as I said, put them, make sure that you're putting them in the place that they end up being on the board. And one more. Yeah, let's see, we've got a 4 by 3 right now. Let's make that a 4 by 4. So we'll go one more, and one more. Okay. So we got a 4 by 4 block in the corner to start with. And I'm going to recheck this, make sure, yeah, 3W2L, 2W, W2L. Okay. This is correct the way it's supposed to end up. I'm going to take the pencil, go around the edges of that block very lightly. It doesn't have to be a heavy mark. You'll see it. Bring that out. And then take your glue. This is Tight Bond 2. You can use Tight Bond 2 or Tight Bond 3. Any of the decent wood glues. You can get it at Lowe's, Home Depot if you don't have any already. It's just yellow wood glue. I'm not going to glue this up just for the sake of the demo. Put a little bit on there and use the brushes and brush this out pretty thin all across this space that you've created. And don't go all the way to the edge. Don't go all the way to the pencil line. You want to give it some room to squeeze out and make sure it's a fairly thin coat, because you don't want to have a lot of excess glue squeezing out underneath these letters or between the blocks. If you do, you'll end up with a mess. 2 is it'll keep the subsequent rows and columns from pushing in as nice as you'd like. It'll end up getting stepped out, jammed out, and by the time you get way over here, it's going to be a train wreck. You're going to have a mess. Don't use excessive amounts of glue. Now, if you want to practice, I've included a little piece of leftover stuff. It's a backing board and a couple of pieces of the frame rail that I had left over from just sample cuts. And there's some extra squares that you can assemble a little sort of a practice block, if you like, using this material. Just take this out, brush some glue on it, put the letters, blocks, the plain ones on, and just try it and see how to get a feel for how much glue is going to go on there and how to press the blocks together to make it work right. I really recommend that. It'll help you. It'll also help you down the road. I'll explain that later. Okay, now that you've got your glue on there, just take your letters and put them right back where they came from. And do this, as I said, do this religiously. Be very careful when you set these letters into the glue. Set them in. Don't hurry. You got time. As long as you're not working in the Sahara Desert, this stuff takes a little while to set up, and you got time to fool around with it. Okay. Now, make sure that the rows and columns are pushed together as snugly as you can without popping them, without making them buckle. Put them in there, get them pressed down into the glue nice and firm all the way across. Push them down with your fingers and leave them for a second. What I would recommend doing, the way I would do it, is I would take another piece of board, just a flat board of almost any kind. You can get another piece of MDF, you can get a piece of plywood, it doesn't matter as long as it's really, really flat. And about this size, about the size of a floor tile. Take that and take your little sample piece, because it's the same height. Set that over there and then set your extra board on it so that the corner comes right up onto this material here, and then put a weight on it. Put a brick, can of paint, almost anything you got laying around. Put that on it and just let it sit there for a few minutes until the glue really kind of tacks up. Probably 5 minutes is enough. If you want to spend a little more time on it, I'd say go ahead and let it sit there for 10 minutes. When you do that though, make sure that the board isn't all the way to the edge of the blocks so that you can watch them. When you put the weight on, what you want to do is make sure that they stay where you push them into the corner to begin with. You don't want them squirming out on the glue. Sometimes that'll happen with wood glue. It'll allow the blocks to kind of skate a little bit. So what you want to do is observe the blocks when you put the weight on them or you clamp them. You can, if you got this close to the edge of a workbench, you can put a clamp on that. I recommend rehearsing that move. If you're uncomfortable with doing this kind of thing, make sure that you really kind of got a handle on doing this before you go ahead and glue it up. But go ahead and block this out, glue it down, wait it a little bit, let it set for 5-10 minutes, and then you can come back. And what I would recommend is, now that you kind of got a feel for the glue and a feel for the process, go ahead and do another couple of rows and columns. What I want you to do is go this way across. I don't want you to go this way and then this way. I want you to go in a corner block fashion. That way you can set your weighting or your clamping mechanism. You can always set it on this corner and have it marching towards up here. This is your finish line, or finish corner if you like, out here. So with that in mind, what you want to do is, once again, take some squares, 2 or 3 at a time, or whatever you want to do. Just don't let them get out of registration where they were to begin with. So let's go ahead and put these on there. And then we'll do 2 more columns. And make sure they stay what I call right side up. So we do that. Now you could, I suppose, if you wanted to streamline this part of it a little bit, you could, when you first get the board and it's empty and I tell you to go ahead and rehearse the position, I suppose when you take it all apart, you could mark this for the glue lines if you like, and that might streamline it a little bit. I hadn't thought about it until just now, but that's another way to go. But I'd go ahead and mark this again, just to be really careful about it. And then, as you know, we put 2 rows on here. So we move the 2 rows off, and then we move the 2 columns off. And we take our glue, once again, squirt a little glue on there, dip, 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 like that. And then very carefully put them back, And you can do them one at a time or two at a time, whatever suits you. I don't recommend doing it necessarily the way I'm doing it, just shoving them in, because you may end up shoving the glue all over the place. Once again, you want to look at how you got them in there and make sure they're nicely packed down. Packed into this corner, going this way and this way, so that you've got a nice setup. Now, if you get a little bit of a stagger, I don't know if you can see this in the video, you'll see a little bit of a stagger here and here that's developing. I wouldn't worry about that, and I've seen that in the practice piece. What happens is the laser that cut these cuts them very precisely, but there's always a little bit of variation in wood because of the way the wood burns along the laser cut. But over a 15-piece row or a 15-piece column, what you end up with is some are bigger and some are littler and some are bigger and some are littler. So what winds up typically happening is by the time you get out here, all these littlers and biggers have kind of averaged out. What I'm saying is you don't end up with a whole row of big or a whole row of little. It's just probability. You're going to end up with some small ones and big ones in every row. So by the time you get over here, it should all come out to be pretty much the same. It won't be exactly the same, but it'll be close enough so that it won't give you any trouble. I didn't have any trouble with this one, but then I didn't glue it up, so I can't really say how it's going to come out in the end. One more precaution. If you end up with glue squeezing out along these edges, take a dry, not wet, dry rag and come in here and wipe that out. Wipe it out right tight up against the blocks so that you get all that glue off. Because if you let that dry or set up in there, once again, probably don't have to tell you this, but it will interfere with the next rows and columns. It'll make a mess. So get that taken care of. Again, take the practice block, take your piece of material that you've got as a clamping mechanism, put that on there, put your weight on it or put a clamp on it, and let it set for a few minutes. Make sure that the things don't squirm around when you put the weight on it, as I said before, and then move on. Now, as you get out, you end up with more pieces. You know, doing a 4x4, 6x6 is pretty easy. When you get out here where the row count gets higher and the column count gets higher, you probably want to start doing it kind of a piece at a time. So you take a piece. You're not going to grab 7 of these or 8 of them or 10 of them all at once and throw them on here. Trust me, you'll end up with a mess. Set that on there. I'm only going to do one more of these. I think you guys probably get the idea, and you don't need a whole lot more hints on how to do this or advice on how to do this. Well, John's a lawyer, so he may need a lot of guidance with this sort of common sense stuff. But I'm sure that Sarah and Jim, Kathy, I'm sure you guys can help him through it, you know, because of his profession. It limits his abilities in this regard. Anyway, once again, pencil line, move pieces off, glue, brush, do a nice thin coat, push the pieces back into place, weight, clamps, boom. Keep on going until you've got the whole thing put together. When you do, make sure, and you know, if you made a mistake way down here, you're way past that. So you're in trouble. But hopefully you've been watching and checking your line. Check your lines as you go along. Check all of your spacing and try to make sure that it looks a lot like what you see here as you're going along and what you see over here. Now, I'm going to push this back together as if I had done all the assembly and got it done, like you have at this point. So what we want to do is shove this back. If I can do this in one whack, I'm going to be so surprised. Because it should. I'll be damned. Okay. Well, we got it all back together. Now, what you want to do, now that you've got it, it's all glued up, and it's in this position. You say, okay, what do I do now? Well, what you do now is you put the frame rails on. Put a little bit of glue on where it's marked, where it says side rail B, and there's a side rail B up there. Put a line of glue along right where the marking is. Don't put it anywhere else. Put that top rail on, or you can put the side rail on first. It doesn't really matter. A little bit of glue on there. Put that one on. And what I would recommend at this point, because you're going to need to do it anyway, is take a couple pieces of, you don't need this anymore. So what I would do is I would just cut a chunk out of here and another chunk off the other edge, or 2 chunks off it, depending upon how straight a saw cut you can make. And I'm going to use some material that I've got laying around as a substitute for that. Let's assume that you've cut a couple strips off of that piece of MDF. I would take the first one and I would put it up here. And the other one I'd put down here at the bottom. And I would go ahead and, if you can, either use a piece of plywood underneath, or if you've got a workbench that you don't mind beating up on a little bit, I would just go ahead and drive a couple screws into this piece of material and this one down here, so that this is sort of locked into place. Now, as far as the frame is concerned, to get that to stay right where you want, you may want to move this off to the corner of the workbench and put clamps on this until the glue sets up. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but I would want to have the frame clamped to the base and set up pretty good before I get into this stuff. So I jumped ahead a little bit, I suppose. But I think you guys know how to clamp a picture frame together and glue it down. Anyway, once you've got these strips in place and this thing is completely dry, you're happy with the way it's framed up, now what you got to do is sand this. And what I recommend strongly, do not power sand it. Do not use an orbital sander of any kind unless it's got a hard base on it. What I mean is, most orbital sanders have a rubber base or a rubber pad that the sandpaper sits on, or it has Velcro on it that softens the pad a little bit. And that's kind of nice for some things. But the hardness of each of these little squares is different from species of wood to species of wood. So you have hard maple there, and you've got babinga, and there's some wenge, and there's some mahogany, and there's some purple heart here. They're all different, and they have different hardnesses. So if you use a power sander that's got a soft pad on it, what'll happen is it'll bite into the softer materials, and it'll kind of sit up on the harder stuff. So you'll end up with this surface that's kind of, it's got some dips and waves in it where the harder stuff resisted the sanding and the softer stuff gave away. So you don't want to use a soft-faced power sander. This doesn't take a whole lot of sand, at least I don't think it will. This shouldn't take a whole lot of sanding anyway. I'm not going to sand this because all the pieces are loose and it would just go flying all over the place and make a hell of a mess. So what I would tell you to do is just get a block of wood, hardwood preferably, that's got a nice flat face on it, very flat, very smooth, and get some 60 grit sandpaper. Make a little sanding block that's nice and flat, nice and hard, and here's where those marks on the back of the plane pieces come in, is all the grain is running up and down on this thing now. And all the grain, the way I had the laser cuts done, is all the grain in the colored or number letter blocks, the dark blocks, that goes this way as well. So all of the grain except for the frame is going in the right direction. So what you want to do is start anywhere you like, but just start block sanding this. Back and forth, up and down, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, up and down, until you get a nice, fairly flat, if you're comfortable with the surface, then stop there. Go take the same block and get a piece of, this is 220, 180 works. Whatever you've got that's in that medium fine neighborhood, go ahead and sand that out. If you're doing this inside, there's just one precaution. If you're doing this inside and you're really aggressive with it, if you're hand sanding it, it shouldn't be a problem. But if you're doing it indoors and anybody has allergy problems, some of these woods, these exotic woods like wenge and babinga and all that, some of them can cause people with allergies to be irritated. It can cause you to suffer a little bit. So you may want to use a dust mask. You may want to do this outside. You may want to do it, you may want to have somebody that doesn't necessarily have allergy problems do it. I do it and it doesn't bother me, but I know of people that have had trouble with some kinds of exotic woods. The dust bothers them. Hand sanding doesn't usually raise a big cloud. Power sanding, on the other hand, that's bad. That'll irritate you no matter what you do. But if you block sand it by hand and you don't have a whole lot of sanding to do, because these are all pretty much the same height to begin with, you should be in good shape. So go ahead, if you got to use a dust mask, use the dust mask, but sand it 60 grit to start with. Don't be afraid of 60 grit. It seems aggressive, but it'll work fine. These are all pretty hard pieces of wood, so they'll deal with it just fine. Then the 220, then you want to go to a finish. Now, for a finish, what I would recommend is I've used this stuff. Available Lowe's, Home Depot, typically a clear satin. What you want to do is get a piece of a t-shirt, something that has very little lint, no fuzz. Don't use terry cloth. If you use terry cloth, you'll hate yourself forever. Shake the can, pop it, and when you apply this stuff, use almost a dry rag. Take what's in there and let it soak into the shirt, and don't have it wet, because if it's wet, it'll drop into the letters and the numbers and it'll make a mess. You'll end up with blobs of finish in the letters and numbers. You don't want to have anywhere near that amount of finish on the rag. Go around, and don't worry if it looks kind of lame at first, and it might. On some of this material, it might look a little bit like you didn't do anything, like you didn't accomplish anything. Trust me, if you're patient with it, you follow the instruction, and you follow what I'm telling you to do or suggesting that you do, you will be fine. It may take 3 coats, it may even take 4 coats, but you will get a finish that makes all of this Purple Heart, the stuff in the frame, it'll make this thing look fabulous. All the burn marks will be gone, all the scorches will be gone off of the letters and numbers. You'll be able to see them a lot better, the contrast will be terrific, and you'll have a really nice finished product. At least I think you will. That's assuming that you got it all glued up and pretty like this. I wish you the best of luck. I hope you enjoy it. It was kind of interesting to get all these pieces made and make the frame and all that kind of business. And if it works out for you, let me know.